The basis for our confusion. Chapter 4. The world is a cult. One of the most alarming things is how we seem to see large swaths of the population jumping on board whatever the newest virtue signaling topic of the day is, yet without having any real knowledge of the situation at hand, like, well, this Ukraine-Russia conflict, as we watch every single one of the establishment usual suspects all begin to put out their "I stand with Ukraine" narrative in unison. We then watch all of the sheeple on the social media sites and elsewhere all immediately go into virtue signal mode and begin to trip over themselves trying to stand up fast enough and tall enough for Ukraine. They have no real information on the matter other than what the news media is telling them at this moment. Ask any of them about what happened in Ukraine in 2014 and you'll get crickets. Most won't even know that there was a color revolution there. The ones that do know will explain it through the establishment narrative lens, like the John McCain or the Lindsey Graham lens, where Russia's bad and Ukraine is good, even with neo-Nazis inside their government and their military, an actual military battalion filled, a self-proclaimed neo-Nazi unit. We even saw this behavior going back to COVID and to the vaccine. These people just follow whatever they're being told, period. It's almost cult-like. When we look into cults, we see that no matter the source, there are about 5 core things that all cults share. We'll take a look at these things now, and then we'll see if we can find any of these things being done or used by the establishment controllers today upon the citizenry. Humans desire comfort. In a fearful and uncertain world, many turn to cults because they tend to promote exactly that, comfort. John Patrick Peterson, a psychologist at Caltech, has pointed out that cult leaders often make promises that are totally unattainable, but also offered by no other group in society. Such things might include financial security, total health, constant peace of mind, and eternal life. The things every human desires at the deepest level. Does anyone out there feel like we're living in a fearful and uncertain world? Next, cults satisfy the human desire for absolute answers. Today's world is a tough one with more abstract issues than there are issues that are black and white. As Dr. Adrian Furnham describes in Psychology Today, humans crave clarity. Many people join cults because they believe they're being offered solid, absolute answers for questions such as good versus evil, religion, the meaning of life, politics, etc. Many cult leaders promote messages that are simple and seem to make sense, the exact opposite of what we're often provided with in typical everyday life. Does anyone out there feel like today's world is a tough one with more abstract issues than there are issues that are black and white? Another common trait amongst cults is that those with low self-esteem are most likely to be persuaded by a cult environment. Research done in the past 2 decades has clearly shown this pattern. Does anyone out there feel as though we are living in a world that tends to make one feel insecure? Think of your social media accounts. We'll come back and talk about that a little bit. The 4th common denominator of cults is how they initially love bomb new members or recruits. And this tactic seems to work in conjunction with the 3rd one, and as how they recruit insecure people, hence the love bombing technique to build them back up and show acceptance to them. The odd phrase is commonly used to describe the ways in which someone with low self-esteem is consistently flattered, complimented, and seduced in order to train their brain to associate the cult with love and acceptance. The 5th common denominator is that cults maintain their power by promoting an us versus them mentality. Cults prove powerful because they are able to successfully isolate members from their former non-cult lives. One of the ways cult leaders achieve this is to convince their followers that they are superior to those not in the cult. This us versus them mentality ultimately leads to cult members isolating themselves socially from friends and family. They replace those relationships with new ones inside the cult. They will also throw in some catastrophic Armageddon type scenarios too, like Charlie Manson His followers believed that there was an inevitable race war just on the horizon. Or maybe the Heaven's Gate cult, who believed the Earth was ending and that they were going to escape to another planet when the galaxy was properly aligned. Almost all major cults have used this tactic. So I ask you all this. Think of the news over the past 5 or 6 years, although it's been going on for decades. Think of how they said our government was infiltrated by a wicked foreign leader like Vladimir Putin. Think of if you were a minority during the Trump presidency or an illegal immigrant. You were told that you were going to be deported at any time. As far as geopolitics was concerned, we were told that Trump would no doubt get us into World War III. Of course, later, we get what we were told was a pandemic, with death toll tickers scrolling across our TV screens all day long, with the world shut down and constant media hysteria. From there, we move right into a dangerous Eurasian conflict with a nuclear power, a situation that has the fate of the entire world in its grasp. These are all end-of-the-world type scenarios, dear listeners. This tactic can be seen in the first cult common denominator, where they take advantage of a person's desire for comfort and peace, laying out all the horrible things heading our way when offering the recruit a slice of peace or comfort found within the cult. It's almost a Hegelian dialectic. Create the Armageddon, then offer them a refuge from it. The second common denominator spoke about how the world is so confusing and complicated that one can't even find their way through it all. But that's okay, because the cult or the media is there to give you the simplistic answers that you're looking for in order to make life easier. But it begs the question, is this all by design? The third core cult denominator is that insecure people are more apt to join a cult. If more and more people in the world are insecure, then you have a larger pool of potential cult initiates. And folks, I'd like to quickly point out how social media is contributing to this, especially with the children. I've talked about this before, but for instance, a kid may have 800 friends on Facebook. This 13-year-old sees a friend showing off a new outfit or a gadget every single day. But this kid only gets a new outfit a couple times a year. He or she can't understand how every single day they see a friend flaunting something new. They can't understand that with 800 friends, the odds are that they would be a new friend with a new outfit every day. And this is not to mention that every single picture posted is perfectly staged and filtered to look absolutely glamorous, all causing a little bit of insecurity each time you see it. The fourth core denominator goes along with the third and plays on insecurities and the feelings of being wanted and being accepted. The love bombing comes precisely at the right moment once you've been softened up enough to the rest of the techniques. And finally, the fifth core is that us versus them mentality. Now, this one doesn't have to take much explaining. Please think critically about the last 6 years or so at least. Did the news, the establishment, the controllers, did they ever present to the country an us versus them mentality? What about from 2016 to 2020? Republicans bad, evil, and racist. Dems good, caring, and inclusive. What about COVID? Vaxxers versus non-vaxxers. Non-vaxxers are going to kill us all. As you can see, in fact, an us versus them mentality is pretty much the only thing that they present to us. Finally, when speaking about the potential cult control of populations, we must look at a very controversial subject brought up by Dr. Malone: mass formation psychosis. And before I explain what it is, I want to point out something very telling. When Dr. Malone connected mass formation psychosis with the way millions of people were acting with regards to COVID restrictions, and the vaccine, the major establishment sources all set out to attack this theory. I'm asking you all to do a quick, simple Google search for the term mass formation psychosis and notice the headlines that Google presents to you. When I typed in the term, I wanted the definition. You'd think that would be the first of the search results, but no. The first few dozen are all about Dr. Malone's comments about it and COVID. And not only this, but you will see every headline using words like unfounded or debunked. If you're like me and are very skeptical of the media, then this particular situation simply reinforces our thoughts on what's happening in our world. The establishment doesn't want you to connect the real medical disorder known as mass formation psychosis with the way people are acting during the pandemic. And when they do this, it's usually a tell. They always seem to attack the truth the hardest. Psychosis is when people lose some contact with reality. Mass formation psychosis is when a large part of a society focuses its attention on a leader or leaders or a series of events, and their attention focuses on one small point or issue. Followers can be hypnotized and be led anywhere regardless of data proving otherwise. A key aspect of the phenomena is that the people they identify as their leaders, the ones that can solve the problems or issues alone, they will follow that leader or leaders regardless of any new information or data. Furthermore, anybody who questions the leader's narrative are attacked and disregarded. Sound familiar? It hasn't just happened with the COVID hoax, but it's been going on for years, probably decades. There are 4 key components needed for an environment to experience a mass formation psychosis, and I'd like you to listen closely to these. And I think back to the 5 core denominators with cults, because they're the exact same things. The 4 key elements of mass formation psychosis are lack of social bonds or decoupling of societal connections, lack of sense-making, meaning things don't make sense, free-floating anxiety, and free-floating psychological discontent. Free-floating anxiety is a general sense of uneasiness that is not tied to any particular object or specific situation. It's just there. Ladies and gentlemen, it's no wonder why the media has attacked Mr. Malone's hypothesis. It's even bigger than the pandemic. So this begs one final question. Is it possible that the media and culture has become so centralized and so controlled that the establishment news sources have become some sort of a cult leader? And the powers that be are using social media and other parts of our world that they control to change culture and create an environment that makes regular people more susceptible to joining a cult? Chapter 5, MK Ultra. Project MK Ultra was the code name for an illegal human experimentation program designed and undertaken by the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency and its director, Alan Dulles, in 1953. MK Ultra used numerous methods to manipulate its subjects, mental states, and brain functions. And when we look at the declassified documents, we see they conducted their research through the use of electroshock therapy, hypnosis, radiation, and a variety of drugs, toxins, and chemicals. Now keep those in mind because we're going to come back to them a few times. Before we dig down deeper, I'd like to point out here that the information gathered from these decades of experiments is largely unknown to the general public, and this is the first and probably the oldest form of control. What information have they been able to find through all of these experiments? Things about the human mind that we have no idea about. Things now only known by the psychopaths who are controlling things. This knowledge, not being understood by the masses, could be used against us and we wouldn't even know that it's being done. MK Ultra experiments relied on a range of test subjects ranging from some volunteers, some who volunteered under coercion, and others who had no idea that they were part of any kind of program. From mentally ill boys in a home to soldiers in our military to sexual deviants and psychopaths in mental institutions, it looks like MK Ultra preyed on the most vulnerable, and it looks to me like they found something. Something within this most vulnerable sector of our communities. First, we must understand that it's much more easy to take advantage of a vulnerable person, like a mentally challenged person or PTSD victim. And don't let war get in your way when thinking about PTSD, folks. This illness is being diagnosed by the millions to people who have never served a day in combat. This diagnosis with non-military members has suggested to me that for whatever reason, and there are many, and by design in my opinion, it's saying to me that normal everyday life for many people is so stressful and traumatic that they are exhibiting post-traumatic stress disorder, or shell shock, or battle fatigue, as it has been known as in the past. So when we understand that it's much more easy to take advantage of a vulnerable person like a mentally challenged person or deviant, then we can take a look at the world and see that the environment is absolutely ripe for large swaths of populations to be in states of fear and stress and confusion, and thus not thinking straight, and being more susceptible to believe anyone or anything that purports to be an authority. Obviously, the next normal step in this thought process begs the question, could this be purposefully being done? We look at the scenes going back to the 80s in Beirut, Lebanon, or later in Serbia, then Iraq and Syria. We see war-torn nations with drive-by shootings and bombings and civil wars raging right in the middle of towns and neighborhoods, keeping large areas of people in constant states of fear and stress for years at a time. Throw in the horrendous stress of trying to make ends meet financially in today's world, worrying about crime and trying to explain the mental illness of transgenderism to your 5-year-old who keeps seeing commercials about it or hearing others talking about it, and all of the other stressors in today's world, then it's easy to see, folks, this is the continuation of the CIA's electroshock therapy being conducted on whole populations, including the U.S., and if you don't understand, just flip on an establishment news channel and focus. When we look at some of the other means that the CIA used to conduct their MK research, drugs, chemicals, and toxins, we then turn our head to Big Pharma. We can see that according to an article by The Hill in 2017, over 65% of Americans are on some prescribed drug. I did a very in-depth video on this subject prior to the COVID vaccinations rolling out called How to Control Whole Populations. Check it out if you have time. But since then, I don't need to go into the possibilities of what other things might be found in these medications, as we are starting to find out with the COVID jab. So we're being pumped with medicines and vaccines and are having them pushed upon us in a very intrusive way, and this is a red flag for me. Trust the science, right? From the drugs, we move into the GMO foods. We immediately notice a company that made Agent Orange back in the 60s named Monsanto coming out of nowhere to be our main GMO food provider, basically jump-starting the GMO food industry. As we watch, we see people behind Monsanto flip back and forth between positions in the FDA, Monsanto Board of Directors, and even the CDC. We see GMO foods becoming more and more normal. In fact, with almost all the foods on the shelves having been made genetically in a lab, and with it becoming harder and harder to find non-GMO seeds. We can see that these GMO foods and all of these medications being forced upon us, that this is the CIA's drug, chemical, and toxins method of MK, but just on a whole population scale. When we move to look at the hypnosis method of the MK Ultra experiments, one could argue that the drugs and foods help to contribute to people falling into these unhealthy trance-like hypnotic states. And they're probably correct. However, there's another way for them to conduct hypnosis on the masses, a way that was invented and rolled out just to program you in a way that they would like. This is the television. The programming that we get from TV can't be ignored. It's been happening since its inception. Obviously, the controllers in charge of things have been using TV shows to show everyone how they should act in certain situations that may arise. This is subliminal. This is a subliminal thing that many people don't ever think about, but this is exactly what's occurring. However, there's a much more nefarious, more sinister plan at work. I've showed you guys a link to a Google patent in the past that affects the nervous system by manipulating it through electromagnetic fields and monitors. You should go read it for yourself. To be brief, I can summarize certain points. It says that physiological effects have been observed in a human subject in response to stimulation of the skin with weak electromagnetic fields that are pulsed with certain frequencies near a half a hertz or 2.4 hertzes, such as to excite a sensory resonance. Many computer monitors and TV tubes, when displaying pulsed images, emit pulsed electromagnetic fields of sufficient amplitudes to cause such excitation. It is therefore possible to manipulate the nervous system of a subject by pulsing images displayed on a nearby computer monitor or TV set. For the latter, the image pulsing may be embedded in the program material, or it may be overlaid by modulating a video stream, either as an RF signal or as a video signal. So it's saying that not only can the monitor emit certain frequencies in order to excite a reaction from you, but the particular TV program or video stream could have a signal embedded within it in order to excite a response from you. And if you dig into it a little deeper, you'll see where it can elicit a sexual response from the subject based on the frequency used and where it's pulsing on the subject's body. So not only could Samsung affect your mood or mind through their TV monitors, but a TV or movie producer could embed the frequency within its particular program in order to elicit a response from you that they see fit. And this tech has been laced into the cell phones, no doubt, I'm sure. This leads us down the other rabbit hole of the voice of God technology and telepathy. We don't have time to get into that. When we look at things from, let's say, not so naive perspective, things actually start to make some sense. The CIA electroshock therapy is now done on a large scale through fear and stress. The drugs and toxins experiments are now done on whole countries through pharma and our FDA and Monsanto with the GMOs. It seems as though they found something in these experiments that they began doing so long ago, 70 years ago. And it looks like they're attempting to achieve a certain goal now, implementing it really upon the whole world. We can only theorize as to what this end goal is, but from the looks of things, I don't think it'll be pleasant. Chapter 6. Up is down. The first thing we all must agree upon is that there's a group of people, powerful people, who have been able to amass an inordinate amount of control over the entire world. These people are organized, they have plans, and their plans are generational, meaning that they aren't always achieved within the lifetime of a member of this secret society, but instead, this plan that they are a part of will continue on into the future, now helped through by a descendant or protege of the previous controller who is now passed on. These people began their offensive upon the world centuries ago and have managed to almost totally consolidate their power worldwide. Due to the many checks and balances in place, they don't quite have full control of the most necessary tool in their conquest for a one-world authoritarian communist dictatorship, this tool being the U.S. They've known that since 1776, when those brave men and women stood up to their divine right to rule scam and told that tyrant king to take his errant boy redcoats back to England. But that's another article on its own. So the main goal over the last 70 years or so has been America. We can start with the invention of the television, maybe the most consequential invention of all time, even more consequential than the invention of fire, in my opinion. While fire revolutionized the world in almost too many ways to ever list, the invention of the television, whose story is still not yet fully told, has become a way of delivering professionally packaged propaganda to billions of people at a time. This goes back to parts 1 and 2 of this book that talks about where our information comes from and how it's presented to us. In fact, I contend that TV was rolled out to the public precisely in order to spread to them propaganda. It was military discovered and developed technology, just like hundreds of other technological inventions over the years. Just like I contend that Facebook and Google were military developed, DARPA to be exact. Then unleashed upon the population as a trendy social media app in order to get all the sheep to freely log their entire life into a computer database for the intelligence communities to log and record. And then send over to their army of shrinks to scour and analyze and discover all of the quirky, nuanced traits of human behavior never before able to be recognized due to the inability to ever being able to conduct such a large-scale data collection operation. But not now. All this info in the hands of a very powerful group of psychopaths. With the invention of the television, the powers that be could do a few things. First, they could make TV shows presenting to people the normal way of acting in certain situations, like the way Ozzy would act with when a certain situation would arise with Harriet. Or maybe a child could take a few cues from Jerry Mathers as to how to act when you disappoint one of your parents. But as time went by, we went from Leave It to Beaver to Sex in the City. And in case you weren't paying attention, a few of us were, and we could see a slow, steady march from Ricky Ricardo to Jody Dallas from Soap to Brokeback Mountain to now a full list of shows featuring LGBT storylines. As time went on, the intel agencies began to get more and more involved in Hollywood. In the mid-90s, the agency formally hired an entertainment industrial liaison and began openly courting favorable treatment in films and television. During the Clinton presidency, the CIA took its Hollywood strategy to a new level. trying to take more control of its own myth-making. In 1996, the CIA hired one of its veteran clandestine officers, Chase Brandon, to work directly with Hollywood studios and production companies to upgrade its image. Ben Affleck was one of them, going back to his Tom Clancy days and working with Chase Brandon, eventually leading Affleck to getting his very own director's gig with the movie Argo about the CIA-led hostage rescue from Iran during the Carter administration. Not only did he get to tour the Langley facilities, going to areas where other non-agents would have to wear a blindfold to go, he was also allowed to consult with active CIA analysts throughout all stages and productions of that movie. From Syriana, starring another Langley VIP, George Clooney, to Zero Dark 30, which was basically produced and written by the CIA. From agents like Julia Childs to Woody Harrelson. Go ahead and Google his dad. We can see that the CIA has been deeply ingrained in the television industry since its inception. Of course, none of this could have been moved along as such without a little help from the rest of pop culture. Starting in the 60s, we see what has come to be known as the countercultural revolution. The period beginning in the 60s and lasting until the mid-70s was an anti-establishment cultural phenomenon that developed throughout much of the Western world. It seems to begin as an anti-war movement that quickly evolves. Planned? Quickly evolves into an almost political movement, becoming instrumental in the civil rights movement of the time. In fact, pushing the issues into the forefront and keeping it there, while Congress was able to push through all of the controller's necessary legislation. Conveniently, at this same time, many social tensions began to flare, like issues regarding human sexuality, women's rights, traditional modes of authority, racism, experimentation with psychoactive drugs, and differing interpretations of the American dream. This is the Marxist cultural revolution that was unleashed. The above examples led to all of the radical movements we see today, like the feminists or the LGBT movements, all created in order to break down the traditional family. The other example given was that this time period led to differing interpretations of the American dream, and this one is a doozy, folks. This is the one that laid the groundwork for changing what America really is. This led to reprehensible ways of thinking, like the 1619 Project, or CRT, eventually being taught to the kids. This American dream interpretation is what led to thought processes like social inequality, which led to systemic inequality, which led to mainstream talk about systemic racism in our government, leading to self-hatred and disgust of our government. When coupled with a strong feeling of inequality, we then find Marxist ideas begin to permeate. And folks, these issues that we see arise directly from this time period are carbon copy goals from the famous 45 goals of communism in America, which you can find in congressional hearing testimony, among other places. Destruction of the family using various methods like single-parent households, promiscuous parents, gender and sexuality confusion. Get rid of patriotism, get people to hate their country for all of its injustices. Encourage protests and insurrections as main forms of initiating social change, etc. Much of the exact same stuff that we've really been seeing ramp up lately. Just like in the TV programming, we see it all pushed along using the music of the time too. In fact, many researchers believe that the whole rock and roll revolution was indeed CIA created. One only has to look at Laurel Canyon for proof as to whether there was any CIA involvement in the hippie movement. Obviously, most of you guys know about Frank Zappa and his Laurel Canyon music studio. Most of you may not, however, know is that his father, Francis Zappa, was a chemical warfare specialist assigned to the Edgewood Arsenal. The Edgewood is the longtime home of America's chemical warfare program, as well as a facility frequently cited as being deeply enmeshed in MKUltra operations. Frank married Gail Sloatman, who comes from a long line of career Navy officers, including her father, who spent his life working on classified nuclear weapons research for the U.S. Navy. Gail herself had once worked as a secretary for the Office of Naval Research and Development. Gail attended school with Jim Morrison of the Doors, as their fathers were both naval officers. All CIA, folks. In fact, Jim's dad played a really big role in a very significant world event. Morrison was commander of the United States Naval Forces during the Gulf of Tonkin incident in August of 1964, which sparked an escalation of American involvement in the Vietnam War, which most based researchers believe was most likely a false flag event. From Crosby, Stills, and Nash to the notion that the Beatles were just one big intel operation to the lead singer of the Scorpions literally saying that the CIA wrote the 1985 Cold War hit The Winds of Change, to Jimi Hendrix's manager being a self-proclaimed intelligence agent and possibly being linked to the singer's death. There's no doubt that the CIA was deeply involved. Of course, this era would become appropriately known as sex, drugs, and rock and roll. A secondary movement branching from this one was this women's equality movement. In hindsight, really an attack on the traditional woman of the time. Getting all those women out into the workforce will show those mean old men and out of that home and away from those kids and all that new tax revenue too. Enough tax revenue, in fact, to dump into that now very important U.S. public school system. What with all the parents out of the home now, with the school needs to step up, right? And folks, again, this is all straight out of the 45 Rules of Communism in America, and I'm simply in awe that it seems as though nobody's ever heard of it. We could spend days talking about the counterculture revolution, the rock and roll revolution, the hippie revolution, or the other revolutions that they say spun out from this period, but we don't have that kind of time. We didn't barely even speak about Laurel Canyon, the home base of it all, but we must move on. Another aspect of this is the corporate world. Their control over our reality sits mainly in their advertising messaging. Take a look at the products next time when shopping. Pay attention to the packaging and the merchandising. Notice their symbols. Maybe the LGBT rainbow on your Oreos, or maybe a whole section of BLM apparel located in the most prime real estate inside that store. Maybe it's a commercial with Lady Gaga, LeBron James, and other celebrities telling your children that diversity is our strength, or that the world will end soon due to global warming that we disgusting humans have been doing to ourselves. Ladies and gentlemen, they've completely inundated you with their messaging, and you may think it's not doing this because you aren't recognizing it as it happens, but your subconscious mind is still picking it all up. Especially the symbols that we see on almost all of their packaging and commercials, including their logos themselves, all. And remember, all of this information that you're getting from these fascist corporations, you're also getting from your TV and your music. The Nazi Joseph Goebbels called it reiteration. The last aspect of this cultural takeover is the sports industry. The CEOs are already covered, so you're going to get the same messaging that you've already been getting from the TV, music, and your products. All the powers that be have to do now is control a few top athletes from each sport. Colin Kaepernick, that crazy purple-haired women's U.S. soccer player, LeBron James, etc., and you set them loose on the social media platforms, and you've now got tens of millions of children watching you kneel for the flag, portraying you as some kind of apotheosis. From TV and Hollywood to rock and roll and Laurel Canyon, from the fascist corporations to the useful idiot sports celebrities, the CIA has pretty much full control of the whole of our culture. Throw in the news media and their ability to control or fake actual world events, along with their infiltration into most religious institutions, and we've got our whole reality being controlled by this powerful entity or group. And this is a very scary thing.